The Immortal Vanguard. Chapter 1. The Boom. It was a day like any other in Kerrville. The sun hung high in the sky, casting a golden glow over the small town. The streets were peaceful, locals going about their lives without a second thought to the world beyond their cosy community, nestled near the banks of the Guadalupe River. Nothing hinted at the world-shaking event that was about to unfold. And then came the boom. It started as a distant rumble, low and subtle, like the early tremors of an earthquake or the far-off growl of thunder. Within seconds it grew, swelling to a roar so loud it seemed to split the earth. The sound rolled through Kerrville, shattering windows, setting off alarms, and drawing every soul outside to see what was happening. People staggered out of their homes, shielding their ears against the deafening sound. And then, as the boom faded, the sky itself seemed to tear open, revealing something that had no place on this earth. High above the town, a towering white structure materialized, reaching so high into the heavens that its peak vanished into the clouds. It gleamed with a strange metallic sheen, and the sunlight that hit it seemed to bend and warp, casting unnatural shadows over the town. The tower dominated the skyline, massive and foreboding. Its shadow swallowed the landscape, casting Kerrville into darkness. It was as if day had become night. A chilling hush settled over the town as every eye turned upward, fixed on the impossible sight before them. As they gazed higher, the surface of the tower began to change, its dull metallic grey morphing into a deep blood-red hue that intensified as it stretched toward the heavens. And at the tower's peak, something even more terrifying awaited. A monstrous, demonic face loomed in the clouds. It was enormous, a twisted, yellow-skinned creature with a humanoid shape but grotesque and far from human. Its hollow black eyes stared down, unseeing but unnervingly aware. Thick horns curled from its forehead, and its lips were sewn shut, giving it an expression of eerie silence. Then, without warning, a voice thundered into the minds of every human on earth. It didn't come from the creature's sewn lips, nor was it heard with the ears. It was felt deep within, like an ancient presence speaking directly to the soul. "Humanity's trials have begun," the voice proclaimed. 10,000 of the best humanity has to offer will be sent as the vanguard to humanity's Azura sanctuary. Struggle, strive, survive. Attain the power to defend your race, or perish as countless others have. Fear swept through the crowd, some crying out, others frozen in stunned silence. The message echoed in their minds, clear and powerful, leaving a chilling weight in its wake. What did it mean? What was this tower, and why had it appeared? The air was thick with dread and questions as the townspeople exchanged terrified glances, trying to comprehend the impossible. A few miles outside Kerrville, near the old bridge that crossed the Guadalupe River, a man sat alone, unaware of the terror that had just unfolded. His name was Wolf, though no one knew his true identity. To the locals he was a quiet drifter, but in reality he was far more. Wolf was an immortal, a man who had walked the earth for centuries, witnessing the rise and fall of empires, mastering every form of combat and learning the secrets of magic. He had long ago abandoned the world of mortals, choosing instead to guard it from afar. Those who knew of him called him the Immortal Reaper, a protector of humanity who had quietly eliminated other immortals who abused their power for selfish and destructive purposes. The stories of his deeds had faded into myth, and now Wolf existed as a silent guardian, the last of his kind. As he sat on the bridge, his gaze fixed on the gentle flow of the river beneath him, he allowed himself a rare moment of peace. The river was calm, its surface reflecting his weathered, scarred face, a face that had seen countless lifetimes of battles, losses, and victories. "Nothing more peaceful than this," he murmured, watching the sunlight dance across the water. For a man who had lived through countless wars, this was a precious kind of quiet. For once, Wolf allowed his mind to wander to a place he seldom visited, his own heart. In his endless life, he had sworn never to attach himself to anyone, to guard humanity from a distance. And yet, he had broken that vow. Selene. Even her name brought warmth to his soul. She was a light he had never expected to find, a woman who had reawakened the heart he had long buried. Selene had changed everything, and with her Wolf had found something he thought impossible, a son. Elias was only 4, a boy with the same fierce spirit as his mother, and a brightness that seemed to cut through even the darkest days. For the first time in his long life, Wolf had something real, something worth fighting for. But his moment of peace was short-lived. He felt it before he saw it, a dark, ancient energy stirring in the distance. Slowly, he lifted his eyes to the horizon, where an unnatural shadow stretched over the land. In the distance, towering over everything, he saw it, the blood-red tower, reaching into the heavens, casting an ominous presence that chilled him to his core. "It begins," he whispered, his jaw tightening. Wolf stood, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of the blade at his side. For centuries he had fought and won battles few could comprehend, but this was different. This was no ordinary threat. It was something far older, something powerful enough to alter the very fabric of reality. The world was changing, and humanity was about to face trials beyond anything it had ever known. Wolf had sworn to protect this world, to be its silent guardian, but now he felt the stakes shift. This time he wasn't just fighting for humanity. He was fighting for Selene, for Elias, for the life he had begun to cherish. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the land, Wolf knew his path was set. The Immortal Reaper would rise again, and he would face whatever trials awaited him. This was just the beginning, and he would be ready. With one last glance at the peaceful river, he turned away, leaving behind the quiet moment he had cherished. The time for peace had passed. As the blood-red shadow of the tower loomed over the world, Wolf took his first steps toward a war he had been waiting to fight for centuries. Chapter 2. The Vanguard. Night fell over Kerrville, but the darkness was different now, thicker, more oppressive, as if the world itself sensed the terror looming on the horizon. Word of the tower and the demonic proclamation had spread fast, reaching every corner of the town, the state, and beyond. News reports tried to explain it. Government officials scrambled to respond, but no one had any real answers. The voice had spoken, and its message was clear. Humanity's trials had begun. For Wolf, the world had changed in an instant. He had fought countless battles, but this was something different. This was a threat unlike any he had ever encountered, and it struck at the heart of his resolve. The tower's appearance, the voice's announcement of Azura Sanctuary, and the selection of 10,000 warriors, the Vanguard, all pointed to a trial that would push humanity to its limits. In the shadows of his small cabin on the edge of town, Wolf sat sharpening his ancient blade, the sound of metal scraping against stone grounding him. He was preparing, his mind and body slipping back into the warrior's discipline he had mastered over centuries. But this time, there was more than survival at stake. He was no longer alone in this world, and he could not shake the image of Selene and Elias from his mind. As he worked, he heard a familiar voice behind him. "You're planning to leave, aren't you?" He looked up, meeting Selene's gaze. She stood in the doorway, her expression a mix of fear and understanding. She knew what he was, and she knew that he was bound to protect. That had been part of the burden he carried when he let her into his life. "This is different, Celine," he replied, his voice low and steady. "I've never seen anything like it. The world is going to change, and I don't know how much time we have." She took a step toward him, her hand reaching out to touch his. "But Elias, he's so young, and he needs his father." Wolf's eyes softened as he looked at her, then down the hall to where their son was sleeping peacefully, blissfully unaware of the coming storm. "That's why I have to go," he said quietly. "I need to be part of the Vanguard. I need to see what we're up against." "But the voice said it would choose 10,000, she replied. "How do you know you'll even be chosen?" A faint smile crossed his face, a hint of the confidence he rarely allowed himself to show. "Because I know they're looking for people like me," he replied. "And if I'm not chosen, I'll find another way. I've fought my entire life to protect humanity from threats like this. I won't stop now." Celine's eyes filled with worry, but she nodded, her grip tightening around his hand. "Promise me you'll come back." Wolf looked into her eyes, his own fierce but filled with the tenderness he had never known he was capable of until he met her. "I will. No matter what happens, I'll come back for you and Elias." The following morning, Wolf made his way into the heart of Kerrville. The town was a frenzy of fear and chaos. Rumors of disappearances and strange occurrences were already circulating. People whispered about friends or family who had vanished overnight, and as Wolf passed by, he could feel their stares, the tension that gripped the community. Near the town square, he saw a group of people gathered around a tall, hooded figure. The stranger's voice was calm, resonant, somehow cutting through the fearful murmurings of the crowd. "Those who have been chosen to join the Vanguard," the stranger announced, "will find their way to Azura Sanctuary by instinct. A trial awaits, one that will determine the future of humanity." The crowd shifted, their faces filled with awe and confusion. Some looked as if they were hoping they'd been chosen. Others looked terrified by the thought. Wolf studied the figure carefully. Beneath the hood, the stranger's eyes gleamed with an unnatural light, and he seemed almost otherworldly, an emissary, perhaps, of the beings responsible for the tower and its proclamation. As Wolf approached, the stranger's gaze turned to him, a faint smile playing across his lips. "You," the stranger said, voice barely above a whisper, but carrying an undeniable authority. "You are one of them." Wolf met his gaze with calm resolve. "And where do I go?" The stranger's smile widened, his eyes flickering with a strange intensity. "Azura Sanctuary will call you Immortal Reaper. When the time is right, you will know the way. Until then, prepare yourself. You will face trials that even you have never encountered." With that, the figure turned, his form seeming to blend into the shadows of the street until he vanished completely. Wolf remained, his jaw set, his mind racing. He knew he would be chosen, but he hadn't expected to be called out in front of everyone. His reputation had travelled through whispers and myths, not public proclamations. But the crowd around him looked on with newfound awe. They didn't know his name or his past, but they sensed he was different. And as he walked away, he could feel the weight of their hopes pressing down on him. He had been fighting alone for centuries, but this time he would not just be a warrior. He would be a symbol, a hope for a world thrown into chaos. That night, Wolf sat alone, staring into the firelight. He knew that at dawn he would leave for Azura Sanctuary. The call was already pulling at him, a subtle tug in the back of his mind, guiding him toward whatever awaited. He would need every ounce of his strength, every skill he had honed over the centuries, and something more, something that would drive him to survive against all odds. Celine came to sit beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. In her silence, he felt her love, her fear, and her unspoken trust. He reached up, placing his hand over hers, feeling the warmth and steadiness she offered him. As dawn broke over Kerrville, Wolf stood by the doorway, Selene and Elias by his side. Elias, still sleepy, looked up at his father, his young face full of innocence and wonder. "Are you going away, Papa?" he asked, clutching a small wooden toy Wolf had carved for him. Wolf knelt, his hand resting on Elias's shoulder. "Just for a little while, son, but I'll come back, I promise." Elias nodded solemnly, his small hand reaching out to grip his father's finger. It was a gesture both simple and powerful, a reminder of what Wolf was fighting for. He rose, his gaze meeting Selene's one last time. She didn't speak, but he saw the words in her eyes, the strength she was lending him as he turned and left. As Wolf stepped into the morning light, he felt the pull intensify. His path lay ahead, leading him toward the unknown trials of Azura Sanctuary. But he carried with him the memory of Selene's love, Elias's trust, and a vow that no force in the universe could break. The journey had begun, and the Immortal Reaper was ready. Chapter 3. The Call to Azura. Wolf left Kerrville before the sun rose, the cool morning air sharp against his face as he followed the invisible pull that tugged at him, leading him onward. It was more than just a feeling. It was a compulsion, a force that gripped his very soul. The call of Azura Sanctuary resonated within him, guiding his steps with an unerring clarity. Every few hours the pull would grow stronger, like a beacon flaring in the distance, calling him forward. He walked for miles, traversing dusty trails and winding roads that led away from the town he had known as home for the past few years. As he journeyed, he sensed something strange in the air, a ripple, a disturbance that seemed to echo through the landscape. He knew he wasn't the only one on this path. Others had felt the call as well, each of them moving toward the unknown trials that awaited. As dusk fell on the second day, Wolf finally reached the edge of a desolate forest. Towering pines loomed before him, their branches thick and knotted, casting long, ominous shadows that blanketed the forest floor. The air here was different, heavy, charged with an unnatural energy that felt almost alive. A faint mist curled around the roots of the trees, shifting and coiling as if watching him. Wolf paused, taking a steadying breath. This was the place. He could feel it in his bones, a deep certainty that Azura Sanctuary lay beyond the forest. The first trial awaited him, but what that entailed remained a mystery. He took a step forward, the forest swallowing him whole. The further he walked, the denser the mist became, until it obscured nearly everything beyond a few feet in front of him. The silence was absolute, the air thick and still. Not a single bird chirped, nor did a single branch crack underfoot. It was as if the forest itself held its breath, watching his every move. After an hour, he felt something shift. A faint sound, distant, rhythmic, like a heartbeat, began to pulse through the mist. The sound was deep and steady, and with each beat, the mist seemed to vibrate, responding to some unseen force. Wolf tensed, his instincts flaring. He drew his blade, the ancient weapon gleaming in the dim light. The heartbeat grew louder, a rhythmic drumbeat that seemed to echo through his mind, stirring memories of battles long past. Then, from the mist, a figure emerged. It was a warrior, tall and imposing, clad in dark, tattered armor that seemed to absorb the light around him. His face was obscured by a horned helm, his eyes hidden behind a visor that glowed faintly with a sinister red light. He held a massive sword in one hand, its edge serrated and dripping with an otherworldly energy. Wolf held his ground, his grip tightening on his blade. He sensed the power radiating from this figure, an energy that felt ancient and dark, something not of this world. The warrior spoke, his voice deep and hollow, echoing through the mist. "You are the Immortal Reaper," he intoned, his words slow and deliberate. "Guardian of the mortal realm. You have slain countless immortals. But can you survive Azura's trial?" Wolf met the warrior's gaze, his expression calm but his senses alert. "I have survived more trials than you can imagine," he replied, his voice steady. "I have no intention of failing now." The warrior tilted his head as if considering his words, then raised his sword. "Then prove it!" Without warning, the warrior charged, his movements swift and fluid despite his massive frame. Wolf sidestepped, his instincts honed by centuries of combat, and the warrior's sword sliced through the air where he had stood moments before. Wolf countered, his blade flashing in a quick, precise arc aimed at the warrior's side. The warrior parried, their blades clashing with a resounding clang that echoed through the mist. Sparks flew, illuminating the space between them for a brief moment before they disappeared into the darkness once more. They fought in silence, each movement calculated, each strike a test of skill and resolve. Wolf could feel the weight of the warrior's power with every blow, a relentless force that pushed him to the edge. But he held his ground, his experience and determination matching the warrior's strength. The battle raged on, a deadly dance of blades and shadows. The mist swirled around them, thickening and thinning with each exchange, as if it were an audience to their fight. Then, in a single swift movement, Wolf saw an opening. He feinted to the left, drawing the warrior's sword off balance, and lunged forward, his blade driving into the warrior's chest with a force that sent him staggering back. The warrior let out a low growl, his hand clutching the wound, dark energy seeping from the gash. He stumbled, then fell to his knees, his sword slipping from his grasp. Wolf stepped back, his breathing steady but his gaze sharp. "Is that the first trial?" The warrior's gaze met his, the red light in his visor dimming. "The first of many," he replied, his voice fading as he dissolved into the mist, leaving only his helm and sword behind. As the mist reclaimed its silence, Wolf felt a surge of energy rush through him. The trial had left him stronger, sharper, as if the essence of the warrior had become part of him. He knew this was no ordinary fight. Azura's sanctuary was testing him, and with each test he would gain strength, but at a cost he could not yet understand. He picked up the fallen helm, studying its intricate carvings and the faint glow that pulsed within. It was a relic of a bygone age, infused with an energy that hummed through his veins as he held it. As he placed it aside, a path revealed itself through the mist, a narrow trail leading deeper into the forest. He sheathed his blade and followed, his mind steeling itself for whatever awaited him next. The path led him to a clearing illuminated by an ethereal blue light that seemed to emanate from the trees themselves. In the center of the clearing stood a stone altar carved with strange symbols that pulsed with a faint, otherworldly glow. Wolf felt the pull again, stronger this time, guiding him toward the altar. As he approached, a voice echoed through the clearing, soft and ancient, carrying a weight of wisdom and sorrow. "Welcome, Reaper of Immortals," the voice whispered, its tone both gentle and severe. "You have passed the trial of strength, but strength alone will not serve you here." Wolf looked around, seeking the source of the voice, but saw nothing. The voice seemed to come from the very air itself, resonating through the trees and stones. "What is the purpose of these trials?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with curiosity. "Why call us here? Why test humanity?" There was a pause, as if the voice were considering his question. "Humanity stands on the edge of an age-old cycle," it replied. "A cycle of destruction and rebirth, one that has claimed countless civilizations before yours. Azura Sanctuary is the last hope, the only chance for humanity to transcend the cycle, to grow beyond the limitations of fear and power. But to survive here, you must prove your worth, prove that you can rise above the darkness within you." Wolf listened, his expression unreadable. He had lived through the fall of empires, had seen the rise and ruin of civilizations. But the idea of a cycle, one that had shaped the fate of entire worlds, was something he had never considered. "What do I need to do?" he asked, his voice steady. The light around the altar intensified, casting strange shadows across his face. "To survive Azura, you must face your deepest fears, confront your past, and discover the strength hidden within your soul. Only then can you unlock the power needed to protect those you hold dear." Wolf nodded, a flicker of determination in his eyes. He had faced unimaginable horrors, had fought battles no mortal could withstand. But the mention of his past, of the darkness he carried within, struck a chord that resonated deep within him. He knew that this trial would be unlike any other. As he placed his hand on the altar, the world around him seemed to shift. The forest faded, the light dimmed, and he found himself standing in a barren wasteland, surrounded by shadows. In the distance he saw a figure, a young boy, standing alone amidst the ruins. The boy looked up, his face pale and frightened, his eyes wide with a fear that cut through Wolf like a blade. Wolf's heart pounded. He knew that boy. It was himself, centuries ago, before the curse of immortality, before the battles and the bloodshed. He took a step forward, but the shadows thickened, swirling around the boy like a living wall separating them. Wolf felt an overwhelming urge to reach out, to protect the boy from the darkness that threatened to consume him. "Face your past," the voice whispered, its tone filled with both warning and encouragement. "Only by confronting the shadows within can you find the strength to move forward." Wolf clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. He had lived with the weight of his past for centuries, had buried it deep within himself to survive. But now, as he looked into the terrified eyes of his younger self, he knew he could no longer hide. Taking a deep breath, he stepped forward, his mind and heart prepared to confront the darkness he had spent a lifetime avoiding. The trial of Azura had only just begun. Chapter 4. Shadows of the Past. Wolf's footsteps echoed through the silence as he moved deeper into the mist-shrouded forest. Every step carried him further from the world he knew and into the heart of Azura Sanctuary, where the trials awaited him. A sense of dread coiled in his chest, a feeling he hadn't known in centuries. This was different from any battle he had fought, any enemy he had faced. This wasn't a trial of blood and steel. It was something more personal, more piercing, something that would tear at the soul rather than the flesh. He felt the tug pulling him forward, deeper into the shadows, the pulse of energy thickening around him until it became nearly suffocating. He stepped into a clearing, and the mist seemed to settle, a thick, unmoving veil. The silence became complete, pressing down on him like a weight, and then the landscape around him began to shift. The forest faded away, and Wolf found himself standing in a vast, barren wasteland under a dark, blood-red sky. The air was still, empty of sound or life, and there, standing alone in the middle of that wasteland, was a figure, a child, no more than 8 years old, dressed in simple clothes. The boy was small, with dark hair falling into his eyes, his frame thin and vulnerable. He was Wolf's younger self, a shadow of the past he had tried for centuries to forget. Wolf took a slow, steady breath, feeling an ache in his chest that was almost foreign to him. He had long buried these memories, locked them away, believing that if he didn't look back, they would lose their power. But now, here they were, rising like ghosts summoned from the grave. The boy looked up, his eyes wide and haunted, and in them Wolf saw the fear he had felt so many years ago, the fear of being abandoned, of being alone, of losing everything. He remembered that feeling, the raw terror and helplessness that had driven him to become the man he was now. He remembered the night he had lost his family, his home, everything he had loved. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, the silence stretching between them like a chasm. "Why are you here?" the boy asked, his voice small and trembling, carrying an accusation that struck deep. "Why did you leave me here alone?" Wolf felt his throat tighten. How could he explain to this child, this piece of himself, that he had done what he thought was necessary, that in order to survive he had had to leave behind parts of himself, his innocence, his compassion, his very humanity? I thought I had to," Wolf said, his voice low and rough. "I thought it was the only way to protect others, to become strong enough to stop the kind of pain we felt that night." The boy's eyes filled with hurt, his small fists clenching. "But you left me in the dark," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You left me alone. You didn't protect me. You just left." Wolf closed his eyes, feeling the words hit him like blows. He could feel the pain of that night as vividly as if he were living it again, the flames consuming his village, the cries of the dying, the smell of ash and blood. He remembered hiding, helpless, terrified, while everything he had ever known was destroyed. And he remembered the vow he had made that night, the promise that he would never be powerless again. "I thought I had to become something stronger," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper. "I thought, if I could be strong enough, I could protect others. But to do that, I had to leave you behind." The boy shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "You became a monster," he whispered, his voice filled with bitterness and sorrow. "You became the Reaper. You killed, you destroyed. You turned yourself into something dark, and I was left in the shadows." Wolf opened his eyes, and the guilt he had tried so long to ignore came crashing down on him, flooding him with a grief he hadn't felt in centuries. He saw himself through the boy's eyes, not as a protector, not as a guardian, but as someone who had sacrificed everything that was good and pure in himself for power. He felt the weight of his actions, the lives he had taken, the loneliness that had defined him for centuries. He had thought he was becoming stronger, but in doing so, he had lost parts of himself he could never reclaim. The boy took a step closer, his expression shifting from anger to something else, something that pierced Wolf's heart with a sorrow he hadn't allowed himself to feel. "You could have been more than this," the boy whispered. "You could have been someone who cared, someone who loved, but you chose the darkness." Wolf felt his own heart breaking as he looked into the boy's eyes, the innocence and hope that he had once carried, long lost to a path of bloodshed and vengeance. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice shaking. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting others, but I see now that I was running from the pain, running from myself." The boy's face softened, and he reached out, his small hand brushing against Wolf's own. The touch was warm, grounding, as if reminding him of the humanity he had tried to bury. "You don't have to be the Reaper anymore," the boy said, his voice gentle. "You don't have to fight alone. You don't have to leave everyone behind." Wolf's breath caught, the truth of the boy's words striking deep. For so long he had carried this burden alone, believing that isolation was the price of his strength. But now, as he looked into his younger self's eyes, he felt something shifting within him, a realization that he didn't have to bear this weight alone, that he could find a new path. "I won't leave you again," he promised, his voice breaking. "I'll carry you with me, all of you. The parts I left behind, the parts I thought I didn't need. I'll be whole again." The boy's eyes filled with hope, and he smiled, a soft, gentle expression that filled Wolf with warmth. The landscape around them began to fade, the barren wasteland transforming back into the misty forest. The boy's image flickered, growing fainter, but the warmth of his presence remained, a reminder that Wolf had not lost himself entirely. As the boy disappeared, Wolf felt a weight lift from his heart, a burden he hadn't even realized he was carrying. He was not the Reaper, not the monster he had feared becoming. He was a man, shaped by pain and loss, but capable of love and compassion, of strength beyond the blade. When the vision cleared, Wolf found himself back in the clearing, the stone altar before him. The mist around him had thinned, revealing a path that led deeper into the forest. He felt different, lighter, as if he had reclaimed something essential, something he had long forgotten. The voice returned, softer this time, a gentle whisper that seemed to carry both sorrow and pride. "You have faced your past, Immortal Reaper. You have found the strength hidden within your soul. But there is more to learn, more to become. The next trial awaits, where you will confront the darkness you have embraced. Only by confronting it can you transcend it." Wolf nodded, his gaze steady as he looked toward the path ahead. He felt a calmness he hadn't known in centuries, a sense of unity within himself that gave him strength. He was ready to face whatever lay ahead, knowing that he was not defined by his past, but by the choices he made now. As he continued through the forest, the mist gave way to a towering cliff, its face carved with symbols of protection and sacrifice, ancient runes that pulsed with a faint blue light. At the base of the cliff stood an open gateway, leading into a vast temple that radiated an aura of power and mystery. Wolf crossed the threshold, entering a grand hall lined with statues of warriors and heroes from ages long past. They looked down on him with solemn eyes, their expressions a mixture of sorrow and strength. He felt their presence, a legacy of those who had walked this path before him. At the center of the hall, a circle of symbols glowed on the floor, their light filling the room with a gentle warmth. Wolf stepped into the circle, feeling a surge of energy rush through him, amplifying his senses and sharpening his focus. The air shimmered, and spectral figures began to appear around him, flickering in and out of existence. They were warriors like him, each bearing the mark of Azura, each a testament to the trials of the past. One figure, a tall woman clad in silver armor, stepped forward, her gaze piercing. "You have faced the shadows of your past," she said, her voice echoing through the hall. "But the true trial lies within, in the heart of Azura. You must confront the darkness that you have embraced, the part of you that became the Reaper. Only by facing it can you transcend it, become something more than the sum of your battles." Wolf met her gaze, understanding the weight of her words. This was the purpose of the trials, to strip away the armor he had built around himself, to reveal the core of who he was and what he could become. He was no longer alone, no longer the isolated warrior, but a man who had reclaimed the pieces of his soul he had lost. The woman extended her hand, and a mark appeared on his arm, a symbol of Azura that pulsed with a faint, steady light. "This is your bond," she said, her voice softening. "A reminder of the commitment you have made. You are part of something greater now, part of a legacy that spans ages. Carry it with honor." Wolf looked at the mark, feeling the energy within it, the connection to the warriors who had walked this path before him. He was ready to face whatever trials awaited, knowing that he was no longer defined by the shadows, but by the light he had reclaimed. As the vision faded, he found himself alone in the hall once more, the mark glowing softly on his arm. He took a deep breath, his heart steady and his resolve unbreakable. Azura Sanctuary awaited, and he was ready to face whatever trials it held, knowing that he was not the Reaper, but a man reborn, a guardian of hope. Chapter 5. Descent into Darkness. The temple loomed around Wolf, its silence heavy, its corridors stretching endlessly into the darkness. The weight of the mark on his arm was a constant reminder of the oath he had taken, a reminder of the promises he had made, not only to himself, but to the younger self he had finally reclaimed, the innocent part of him that still believed in light amidst all the shadows. He was no longer only the Immortal Reaper. He was a guardian, a man who had remembered what he fought for and why. The first trial had stripped away layers of his past, forcing him to face the pain he had tried to bury. But now, with every step deeper into Azura Sanctuary, he felt a shift, as if the sanctuary itself was stirring, as if it knew that something darker awaited him. The air grew colder as he moved through the halls, the light dimming until he could barely make out the path ahead. Statues lined the walls, their faces obscured by time, each figure holding a different weapon, their expressions a mixture of anguish and resolve. He could feel their eyes on him, like spectres of warriors who had fallen in their own trials, warriors who had failed to transcend the darkness. At the end of the hall a doorway appeared, shrouded in shadows. He could feel the energy radiating from beyond it, a pulsing, malevolent presence that seemed to seep into his bones. As he approached, the voice of Azura echoed softly through the hall, no longer the gentle whisper, but a deeper, more somber tone. "Enter, Reaper. Here you will confront the darkness within, the part of you that has taken life without remorse, the part of you that believes power is the only way. To move forward, you must face the truth of what you have become." Wolf hesitated, his heart pounding. He had faced countless enemies, had waged battles that would break most men. But this was something else. This was a battle he had always avoided, a battle against the very darkness he had embraced to survive. With a steadying breath, he stepped through the doorway. He found himself in a vast open cavern, the walls shrouded in shadows that seemed to breathe and pulse. The floor was littered with broken weapons and remnants of armor, scattered as if left by warriors who had come before him. The air was thick with the scent of decay, a tangible reminder of the countless lives that had been lost here. In the center of the cavern stood a figure, cloaked in darkness. It was tall, powerful, with a presence that filled the room like an impending storm. And as Wolf's gaze focused, he felt a chill run down his spine. The figure looked exactly like him. This was no shadow. This was no trick of the mind. Standing before him was a perfect reflection of himself, clad in dark, battle-worn armor, his eyes glowing with an unsettling crimson light. The face was his, but twisted, harder, crueler. This was the man he had become, the Reaper, the killer, the warrior who had sacrificed everything for strength. The dark wolf smirked, his expression a mockery of Wolf's own stoic resolve. "So," he said, his voice cold and sharp, dripping with disdain, "this is the man who believes he can be redeemed, the man who thinks he can carry the weight of all those he's killed and still walk in the light." Wolf's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. He knew this was part of the trial, knew he had to confront the part of himself that he had buried beneath layers of duty and purpose. The dark wolf circled him, his steps slow and deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. "Tell me," he continued, his voice mocking, Did you think saving a few innocents, sparing a few lives, would cleanse you of all the blood on your hands? Did you think pretending to be a protector would change what you are? Wolf met his doppelganger's gaze, his voice steady. I know who I am, and I know what I've done. I fought because I had to, because others depended on me. The dark wolf laughed, a hollow, bitter sound that echoed through the cavern. You lie to yourself, just like you always have. You fought because you loved it. The thrill, the power, the control. Don't deny it. A flicker of doubt stirred in Wolf's heart, memories rising unbidden. He remembered the battles he had waged, the lives he had taken with merciless efficiency. There had been moments, fleeting and shameful, when he had revelled in his power, when he had let the thrill of combat drown out the weight of his actions. It was a truth he could not deny. The dark wolf's smile widened, sensing the crack in his resolve. See, you can't deny it. You are not a protector. You are a killer. You left behind love, compassion, humanity, all of it because you wanted to be feared. You wanted to be untouchable. Wolf's fists clenched, his gaze fixed on his reflection. I did what I had to do to survive. The dark wolf stepped closer, his voice low and venomous. Survival? Is that what you tell yourself? That all of this was just to survive? He sneered. You've worn the title of Reaper for so long that you've forgotten who you were. But I remember. I am the part of you that will never let you forget. Wolf felt the weight of those words sink into him, each one a barb that tore at the walls he had built around his heart. He knew there was truth in what his reflection said, knew that he had become something darker than he had intended, but he also knew there was more to him than that. He had chosen to fight, not just for himself, but for those he loved, for the innocents he had sworn to protect. Slowly, he lifted his gaze, meeting his reflection's burning eyes. You are a part of me, he said, his voice strong, resolute. But you are not all of me. Yes, I have killed. Yes, I have made choices I regret. But I have also loved, also saved, also protected. I am not just the Reaper. I am more than that. The dark wolf's expression shifted, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. You think you can silence me? Bury me with your pretty words? He snarled, his hands curling into fists. I am the strength that kept you alive. Without me, you are weak. Wolf took a step forward, his voice unyielding. You are right. You did keep me alive. But I don't need to be you anymore. I don't need to bury myself in shadows. I am not afraid of you. The cavern seemed to tremble, the shadows thickening, swirling around the dark wolf like a storm. You fool, he hissed, his voice rising in fury. You think you can banish me? I am you. I am the part of you that can't be erased. Wolf stepped forward, reaching out, his hand closing around his reflection's wrist. No, he said, his voice steady, his gaze unwavering. You are part of me, but you do not control me. I accept you, the darkness, the rage, the fear, but you will not define me. I am more than the Reaper. I am the man who fights to protect, who chooses love over power, hope over fear. The dark wolf's eyes widened, his form flickering, fading as the shadows began to dissipate. No, no, you can't. Wolf tightened his grip, his resolve absolute. I release you. I release the part of me that clings to vengeance, that fears the world. I walk forward, as a whole man, not as a shadow. With a final, furious scream, the dark wolf disintegrated, dissolving into the shadows that had birthed him. The cavern grew still, the air lightening, as if a weight had been lifted. Wolf stood alone, the silence around him filled with a profound, newfound peace. He looked down at his hands, feeling the warmth of his own skin, the steady beat of his heart. He had faced the darkness within, had embraced the truth of who he was, and now, for the first time in centuries, he felt whole. The voice of Azura returned, softer this time, carrying a tone of pride. You have faced the shadows within, Immortal Reaper. You have chosen to transcend the darkness, to accept the man you have become. This is your power, your strength, to be both light and shadow, protector and warrior. The path forward is now open. As the last echoes of the voice faded, a doorway appeared at the far end of the cavern, bathed in a soft golden light. Wolf stepped toward it, his heart steady, his soul grounded in a strength that went beyond mere survival. He had faced his greatest enemy, not a creature, not a force of nature, but himself. And he had emerged, not unscathed, but whole. With a final glance back at the darkness he had left behind, he stepped through the doorway, ready to face whatever trials awaited him, his soul now his own. Chapter 6. Bonds Forged in Fire. The doorway led Wolf into a new chamber, vast and echoing, its ceiling lost in shadows. The air here was different, warmer, humming with a faint pulsing energy that reminded him of a heartbeat, strong, steady, something that grounded him. The walls glowed with a subtle, fiery light, casting everything in shades of crimson and gold. Symbols and ancient runes shifted across the stone, their glow alive, as though the sanctuary itself were breathing. Wolf took a deep breath, feeling the warmth settle into his bones. This chamber was unlike the others. Here he felt the essence of Azura's sanctuary, a place that demanded both strength and vulnerability. He felt raw, stripped bare after facing the shadows of his past. He had been forced to confront the man he had become, the choices he had made that had led him to darkness. But here, in this glowing, hallowed space, he felt a renewed sense of purpose, something that transcended his own survival. The image of his wife, Selene, and his son, Elias, filled his mind, and he felt a warmth even stronger than the glow of the chamber walls. They were his light, the reason he could endure these trials, the reason he wanted to return whole, changed. His purpose was no longer shaped by vengeance or the need for power. It was shaped by love, a love that had cracked open the hardened shell he had encased himself in for centuries. They had shown him that he was capable of something greater, something worthy. As he moved further into the chamber, he noticed others, dozens, perhaps hundreds, of figures scattered across the space, each one immersed in their own trial. Some were warriors, locked in combat with spectral opponents, while others knelt, lost in visions only they could see. These were his fellow Vanguard, chosen from across the world, each confronting their own struggles, their own paths to strength. Despite their differences, Wolf felt an inexplicable connection with them, as if the sanctuary had bound them all together in a shared purpose. One figure, standing apart from the others, caught his eye. She was tall and strong, with dark, determined eyes and hair bound tightly behind her head. She was staring at a wall of flame that blocked her path, her body tense, her face etched with both fear and resolve. She looked fierce, capable, yet vulnerable, as if she was waging an internal battle as well as the one in front of her. She sensed him watching and turned, meeting his gaze with a hard, searching look. "You're one of them, too?" she asked, her voice a mix of challenge and curiosity. Wolf nodded. "Yes, I'm here to face the trials, just like you." She let out a humorless laugh. "Strange, isn't it? We think we're strong, but this place—" She gestured to the flames blocking her way. "It has a way of making us realize that strength alone isn't enough. It wants something deeper." Wolf studied the wall of flame, understanding dawning. "This isn't just a test of strength. he said quietly. "This is a trial of sacrifice." The woman's gaze turned somber. "To go forward, I have to give up something. Azura wants to know if I can truly let go of what's kept me here." Her voice softened, trembling. "I don't know if I can." He knew her struggle. He had walked through the fire himself, surrendering pieces of himself he'd thought he couldn't live without. He thought of Selene, of the way she had looked at him before he left, a quiet strength in her eyes despite her worry, and Elias clutching that little wooden wolf, looking up at him with trust and love that seemed so undeserved. They were the reason he had been able to change, the reason he had been willing to face his own shadows, to cast aside the parts of him that were keeping him from becoming the man they deserved. "What is it you're afraid to let go of?" he asked, his voice gentle. She hesitated, her jaw clenching, her gaze returning to the flames. "My brother," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was taken from me years ago, and I've held on to that anger, that grief, because it's the only thing I have left of him. It's what's kept me strong, kept me fighting." She paused, swallowing hard. "But to go through, I have to release him. Azura is asking me to let him go." Wolf's heart tightened with understanding. He knew the ache of losing family, the need to hold on to whatever pieces of them remained, even if it was pain. And he knew the courage it took to surrender that pain, to let go without losing their memory. He thought of Selene and Elias, how his love for them had given him the strength to face his past without fear. They were his reason, the light that kept him moving forward. "Sometimes the strength we need is in letting go," he said, his tone soft but firm. "Holding on to the pain doesn't keep them with us. It only keeps us from finding peace." She looked at him, tears glistening in her eyes. "But if I let him go, what if I lose him completely?" Wolf placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice filled with a calm assurance. "You won't. Letting go of the pain doesn't mean letting go of his memory. You'll carry him with you, but as a part of your heart, not a wound. He'll always be with you, but he would want you to find peace." She nodded, her gaze steadying, a new resolve building within her. She took a deep breath, exhaling slowly, her expression shifting from fear to acceptance. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I needed that." She turned to face the flames, her body taut with determination. She glanced back at him one last time, her eyes filled with gratitude and strength, and then, with a steadying breath, she stepped into the fire. For a moment her form was obscured, the flames wrapping around her, but she emerged on the other side, her face softened, her steps lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted. Wolf watched her with quiet pride. Her courage had reminded him of his own journey, of the strength he had found within himself because of the love he carried for his family. He had endured these trials not just for himself, but for them, for the chance to return to them as the man they deserved. As he turned back toward his own path, he felt Azura's call deepen within him, a pulsing energy that beckoned him forward. He knew what this trial asked of him. He would have to face his final fear, the weight he had carried in his heart that went beyond grief or guilt, the fear that he would fail, that he would not be enough, that despite everything he would never truly deserve the love he had found. He closed his eyes, letting the images of Selene and Elias fill his mind. He could see Selene's smile, the light in her eyes that had softened the hardness in his soul. He could feel Elias's small hand clutching his finger, his trust unshakable. They believed in him, even when he hadn't believed in himself. And it was for them that he would step into this fire, that he would surrender his fear, that he would become the man they saw in him. With a final, steadying breath, he stepped into the flames. The fire wrapped around him, hot and intense, but he did not resist. He let it burn away his doubts, his self-imposed burdens, the fear that had kept him closed off from others for so long. He let go of the Reaper, the title that had isolated him, the shadow he had worn for centuries to protect himself from the world. In the flames, he felt a profound release, a shedding of the armor he had carried not just in battle, but in his heart. The fire was cleansing, transforming, and in that transformation he saw Selena and Elias waiting for him. He saw himself as a man who could love fully, who could protect without losing himself, who could find strength in connection rather than solitude. When he emerged from the flames, he felt whole, a man unburdened, a man who had become worthy of the life he wanted to return to. He looked at his hands, feeling the lightness, the warmth that radiated from within. He had passed through the fire, not as the Reaper, but as a man reborn by the love he carried for his family. The woman, Lena, stood waiting for him, her face filled with a quiet awe. "You did it," she said softly. "You let it all go." He nodded, feeling a peace that ran deeper than any strength he had known. "Yes," he replied, his voice steady, "and I did it for them, for the people I love, the people waiting for me." She looked at him with newfound respect, a recognition of the journey they had both taken. "We're stronger when we fight for others, aren't we?" she murmured, almost to herself. "Always," he said, the truth of it filling him with quiet certainty. They stood together in silence, the warmth of the fire fading around them, leaving only the quiet strength of their shared purpose. For the first time, Wolf felt the power of companionship, of fighting alongside someone who understood the weight he carried. They were not alone in this trial, and he knew that he had found an ally, someone who would walk this path with him. "Come on," Lena said, releasing his hand and nodding toward the path ahead. "There's more to face, I'm sure." Wolf smiled, a faint, genuine smile. "Yes, but we're ready." Together they walked forward, side by side, into the unknown. The path of Azura Sanctuary stretched before them, filled with trials they could only imagine. But with each step, Wolf felt his strength grow, his purpose sharpen, his resolve deepen. He was no longer just the Immortal Reaper. He was a man renewed, bound by the sacrifices he had made, strengthened by the love he carried for Selene and Elias. And with Lena at his side, he knew he was finally ready to face whatever lay ahead, not as a lone warrior, but as part of something greater. The trials of Azura would not break him. They would only make him stronger, and this time he would not face them alone. Chapter 7. The Echoes of Azura. The path led Wolf and Lena into the deepest part of Azura Sanctuary, where the walls seemed to pulse with energy, and the air was thick with a strange, resonant hum. The further they went, the more the sanctuary's power became palpable, pressing against them, vibrating in their bones. Wolf could feel it, as if the sanctuary itself were alive, watching, waiting. As they walked, Lena glanced at him, her expression one of quiet determination. "I never thought I'd find someone else here," she said, her voice a whisper in the heavy silence. "I thought these trials would break me, but somehow walking beside you makes it easier." Wolf nodded, understanding the sentiment. For centuries he had walked alone, convinced that solitude was his strength. But Selene and Elias had changed that. Their love had softened his heart, had shown him the power of connection. And now, here in Azura, he found himself walking with Lena, a fellow warrior who understood the same burdens, the same sacrifices. The path began to widen, opening into an enormous cavern, its walls shimmering with a strange, ethereal light. At the center stood a massive stone structure, a circular altar carved with symbols and patterns that seemed to twist and shift under their gaze. Wolf felt a sudden tug in his chest, a pull that went deeper than anything he had felt before. "This is it," he murmured, his voice almost reverent. "This is the heart of Azura." Lena nodded, her eyes fixed on the altar. "Whatever happens here, it will be the final test," she said, a note of fear slipping into her voice. Wolf's gaze settled on the altar, and a strange sense of peace filled him. He knew what was coming. He had felt it since he entered the sanctuary, the knowledge that this trial would demand more than strength, more than courage. It would demand that he surrender everything, that he open himself entirely. Together, they stepped toward the altar, and as they did, the air shifted. Shadows formed around them, swirling like mist, coalescing into shapes and figures. Wolf recognized them immediately. They were the echoes of his past, the faces of those he had lost, the friends, the family, the warriors who had fought and fallen beside him. And there, standing among them, were Selene and Elias, their faces radiant, a vision of love and hope. The sight struck him, his heart pounding as he looked into their eyes, feeling the weight of his love for them swell within him. It was a vision, he knew that, yet it felt so real, as if he could reach out and touch them. Lena gasped beside him, her own echoes appearing in the mist. He saw her brother, the one she had struggled to release, standing beside her with a look of pride. Lena's eyes filled with tears, her expression a mixture of sorrow and joy as she reached out toward him. The voice of Azura filled the cavern, deep and resonant, as if it were coming from the walls themselves. "To pass this trial, you must embrace the truth of who you are. You must confront your deepest fear, the fear that has bound you, that has shaped you. Only by surrendering to that fear can you become worthy of the power Azura holds." The words echoed through Wolf, resonating with a truth he had long tried to ignore. His deepest fear wasn't death, wasn't pain. It was the fear of losing those he loved, of not being enough to protect them. That fear had driven him for centuries, had hardened him, had turned him into the Reaper. And even now, standing before the vision of his family, he felt it, that flicker of doubt that told him he might fail, that he might not return to them. The echoes moved closer, their faces filled with a warmth that cut through his fear. Selene stepped forward, her eyes gentle, her hand reaching out as if to touch his cheek. "You are enough," she whispered, her voice soft yet strong. "You have always been enough." Elias looked up at him, his small face filled with trust, with love that knew no bounds. "Come home, Papa," he said, his voice echoing in the cavern. "Come back to us." Wolf's chest tightened, his breath catching as he looked at them. He had been so afraid, so terrified of failing them, of not being the man they deserved. But now, in this place, surrounded by the echoes of his past and the vision of his family, he felt something shift within him, a release, a quiet acceptance. He met Selene's gaze, his voice steady. "I promise, I will come back." He felt her love wash over him, filling him with a strength that was greater than any weapon, greater than any power. It was the strength of knowing he was loved, that he was enough, flaws and all. Beside him, Lena was having her own moment of reckoning, her brother's voice filling the air. "You've done enough, Lena," he said, his tone filled with pride. "You can let go. You can be at peace." A tear slipped down her cheek, her hand pressing to her heart as she closed her eyes, letting his words sink in. She took a deep, shuddering breath, then looked at Wolf, her expression one of calm, of quiet resolve. The voice of Azura returned, softer now, filled with a pride that seemed to ripple through the air. You have both passed the trial. You have embraced your fears. You have surrendered your doubts. Now, you are ready to receive the blessing of Azura. The altar began to glow, the symbols on its surface pulsing with a brilliant blue light. The energy filled the cavern, wrapping around them, infusing them with a warmth that was both soothing and empowering. Wolf felt it flow through him, healing the wounds he had carried in his soul, filling the empty spaces with a light that felt eternal, unbreakable. The vision of Selene and Elias faded, but their presence remained within him, a part of him, their love an anchor that would guide him forward. He felt stronger than ever, not because of power, but because he carried with him the memory of those he loved, the hope for a future he could build. Lena looked at him, a smile breaking through her tears. "We did it," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. He nodded, reaching out to take her hand, their bond solidified by the trials they had faced. "Yes, and now we go forward, together." They turned toward the exit, the light of Azura guiding their way. As they walked side by side, they felt the energy of the sanctuary within them, the blessing of Azura strengthening their resolve, binding them to a purpose greater than themselves. The path ahead was unknown, filled with challenges they could only imagine. But with each step, Wolf felt his spirit grow, his heart steady. He was not the Reaper, not the solitary warrior he had once been. He was a man renewed, a protector, a husband, a father. And as he walked forward, the memory of Selene and Elias in his heart, he knew that he would return to them. Azura had given him the strength to face his fears, to embrace his love, to walk the path not as a lone soldier, but as a man driven by hope. The trials of Azura had not broken him. They had reforged him, bonded him to a strength that would guide him back to the family waiting for him. And this time, he would never walk alone. Chapter 8. The Vanguard's Pledge. Wolf and Lena emerged from the depths of Azura Sanctuary into the crisp night air, where stars scattered across the sky like shards of ancient light. A sprawling valley stretched out before them, filled with the other members of the Vanguard. Warriors, healers, mages, all chosen by Azura and marked by the trials they had faced, stood together, waiting. But even among them, Wolf was different. He was the Immortal Reaper, a title earned through centuries of isolation, battles and sacrifice. Where the others were mortal and bound by the limits of a single lifetime, he had lived many lifetimes, each one marked by hardship, each one a lesson learned in blood and fire. This gave him a presence that was both commanding and enigmatic. His eyes held the weight of ages, of secrets that went far beyond the knowledge of any mortal here. And while they had fought for strength, he had fought to survive the endless burden of his immortality. As he and Lena descended into the valley, the others looked up, their eyes drawn to him in silent acknowledgement. He was more than just another warrior in their ranks. The trials had transformed him in a way that resonated deeply with each member of the Vanguard. A transformation made all the more profound, because he had been willing to confront the centuries of solitude, regret, and loneliness that had once defined him. At the center of the valley, a raised stone platform waited. Upon it stood a figure cloaked in white, exuding an aura of wisdom and calm strength. Their face was hidden beneath a hood, but their presence radiated authority and kindness. The figure looked out over the Vanguard, but their gaze lingered on Wolf, as if sensing the timeless energy that set him apart from the others. "Vanguard of Azura," the figure's voice echoed, powerful yet serene, filling the valley with an ethereal resonance. "You have each passed through fire, through darkness, through trials that stripped you of fear and doubt. But there is one among you who carries a burden unlike any other, a soul shaped by lifetimes, an unbroken thread that stretches through ages of both light and shadow. All eyes turned toward Wolf, a mixture of awe and respect passing through the crowd. He felt the weight of their gaze, but this time he did not stand apart from them. He held his head high, meeting their eyes with quiet strength. "Wolf," the figure said, their voice softer but filled with reverence. "You are not like the others. You have seen empires rise and fall, have known both the bitter taste of loss and the profound weight of solitude. The burden of immortality has isolated you, but it has also prepared you for this path. The gift you have been given is not merely strength, it is the endurance of a soul that has known sacrifice." Wolf felt a shiver run through him, an acknowledgement of a truth he had avoided for so long. He had spent centuries alone, the weight of his endless life pressing down on him, forcing him to grow harder, colder. But here in Azura, he had been forced to let go of those barriers, to confront his deepest fears, to remember the part of him that loved, that yearned to protect, that could cherish even after all he had endured. As the figure's words sank in, he glanced over at Lena. Her eyes were filled with admiration, a quiet understanding that went beyond words. She too had been transformed by the trials, but her path was measured by a single lifetime. Wolf's transformation, however, had taken place over countless years, over experiences no one else could comprehend. "You are bound to this world in a way the others are not," the figure continued, addressing Wolf directly. "You carry a knowledge of humanity that cannot be taught, only lived. That is why Azura called you to this place. It is your endurance, your resilience, that will guide the Vanguard forward." Wolf felt a strange sense of peace as he listened, the words stirring a resolve deep within him. For centuries he had wondered why he had been cursed or blessed with eternal life. But now he understood. It was not a punishment, it was a calling. His immortality allowed him to carry the wisdom of ages, to endure where others might falter, to be a bridge between past and future. The robed figure raised their hands, and a soft blue light radiated from their palms, filling the valley with a gentle glow. "Each of you carries the blessing of Azura within you," the figure said, their voice filling the valley. "But Wolf, your blessing is unique. It binds you not only to the Vanguard, but to the very spirit of humanity. You are its guardian, its memory, its strength." The light shifted, coalescing into threads of energy that reached out to each member of the Vanguard, forming a web of blue tendrils that connected them all. As the light touched Wolf, he felt a surge of energy unlike anything he had known before. It was as if the memories of those around him, their hopes and fears, their strength and resolve, flowed into him, filling the empty spaces in his heart. And for the first time in centuries, he felt whole. The other members of the Vanguard watched him, awe and respect evident in their faces. They recognized him not just as a warrior, but as something more, a guide, an anchor, a protector who had walked paths they could barely imagine. They sensed his strength, but more importantly, they sensed the love that had kept him going, the love he held for Selene and Elias, a love that transcended lifetimes. The robed figure stepped down from the platform, moving through the crowd until they stood directly before Wolf. "You are more than an immortal," they said, their voice soft but unwavering. "You are the memory of this world, the endurance of humanity made flesh. Your love, your loyalty, these are the true marks of your strength, and it is because of them that you will lead the Vanguard." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Wolf felt the weight of their expectations, But instead of dread, he felt a steady confidence rising within him. This was his purpose, his calling. The years of isolation, of battles fought alone, had brought him here, to this moment where he could finally channel his strength for something greater than himself. The robed figure placed a hand on his shoulder, a warmth spreading from their touch. Lead them not as the Reaper, but as the man who has chosen love, who has chosen connection, who has chosen to return to his family whole. Wolf nodded, his voice filled with quiet conviction. I will protect them, all of them. The figure's gaze softened, as if seeing into his heart. Then you will return to them, to your family, and you will return as the man they always believed you to be. The blue light began to fade, settling into each member of the Vanguard, but leaving Wolf with an enduring warmth, a quiet strength that pulsed within him. The other members looked to him now, their eyes filled with hope, trust, a readiness to follow him into whatever lay ahead. As the others began to disperse, forming small groups, making plans for the trials yet to come, Wolf and Lena stood alone at the edge of the valley, gazing out over the land that stretched far and wide, shimmering under the starlit sky. The weight of his new role settled over him, but it did not feel like a burden. Instead, it felt like a purpose he had waited lifetimes to fulfill. Lena glanced at him, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. I always thought I was strong, but compared to you... She shook her head, her voice filled with admiration. I can see why Azura chose you to lead us. He returned her smile, though his gaze remained thoughtful. I've had longer to learn, to endure. But in the end, it isn't about strength or age. It's about the reasons we fight, the people we hold in our hearts. He thought of Selene and Elias, of the love that had carried him through his darkest nights, and felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. What will you do now? She asked, her eyes searching his. Go back to them, he said, his voice filled with certainty. Selene and Elias, they're my light, my anchor. They're the reason I could face these trials, the reason I could change, and they're the reason I'll return. Lena's gaze softened, her admiration shifting to something deeper. Then you'll make it back to them. I believe that. They stood together in silence, two warriors bound by purpose, by love, by the promise to protect the world that lay before them. As dawn broke over the valley, casting its first light across the land, Wolf took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun, the strength of his resolve. He knew the path ahead would be filled with uncertainty, with dangers that would test him to his core. But he was ready. He was not the Reaper, not the isolated, immortal warrior he had once been. He was a man reborn, a protector, a father, a husband. And he would return to them, not only for their sake, but for all those he had pledged to protect. The others looked to him now, but he did not stand above them. He stood beside them as a guardian who had chosen love over solitude, purpose over vengeance. And as he stepped forward into the new day, his heart steady, his mind clear, he knew that he was not just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for the future he wanted to build, for the world he wanted to protect, for the family he would return to. The Immortal Reaper was gone. In his place stood a man with a purpose, a protector bound by love, ready to face whatever trials lay ahead, not as a solitary figure, but as the leader of the Vanguard, as the defender of all that was light and life. Chapter 9. The First Battle. The dawn light filtered through the mist, casting an ethereal glow over the valley as the Vanguard prepared to depart. Wolf, now bearing the mantle of leadership, felt the weight of his new role settle on his shoulders. But this weight was different. It was no longer the burden of isolation or regret. It was a duty to protect not just his family, but a world in need. a duty to lead, to inspire, to hold together those who look to him for strength. Lena joined him at the edge of the valley, her expression one of quiet confidence. Around them, warriors were arming themselves, their movements quick, efficient. Mages prepared spells, their eyes closed in concentration, and healers carried supplies, speaking words of encouragement to those around them. Every individual was unified in purpose, each one strengthened by the trials they had endured. Wolf could sense the energy in the air, a simmering tension, a readiness that ran through the vanguard like an unspoken promise. And as he looked out over the gathered forces, he felt his immortality as both a gift and a responsibility. Unlike the others, he had witnessed centuries of struggle, had faced enemies that these warriors could only imagine. He had the knowledge, the foresight to understand the scale of what they were about to face, and it was his duty to guide them. The robed figure from the night before approached, their face still obscured beneath the hood. But this time they extended a hand to Wolf, their gesture one of both respect and caution. "The darkness gathers," the figure said, their voice barely above a whisper, yet it carried to every member of the vanguard. "Our scouts have detected movement to the north. The first of many threats has begun its approach, testing our defenses. This will be your first test as the vanguard, a trial not of spirit, but of strength, unity, and leadership." Wolf nodded, the weight of their words settling over him. His gaze swept over the faces of the vanguard, each one looking to him with a mixture of trust and anticipation. He knew that for many of them, this would be their first real battle, their first taste of the darkness they had pledged to stand against. His role was clear, to not only lead, but to ensure that they fought with courage, with purpose. Lena's voice broke the silence, her tone steady. "We're with you, Wolf, all of us." He gave her a small nod of gratitude, his own voice resolute. "Then we move north, together." The vanguard began their march, a disciplined formation moving as one across the rocky terrain. Wolf took his place at the front, his presence grounding them, his strides purposeful. As they moved, he felt the familiar rhythm of battle preparation settle over him, but this time it was accompanied by a sense of connection, of unity with those around him. He was not alone. Each person here fought not just for themselves, but for one another. As they drew closer to the northern border of the valley, the terrain grew harsher, the trees twisted and gnarled, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The air grew cold, a sea darkness pressing down on them, heavy and foreboding. Wolf could sense it, the malevolent energy that seeped through the land, ancient and insidious. They came upon the source of the disturbance, a line of dark, hulking figures moving through the trees, their eyes glowing a sickly green. These creatures were tall and twisted, their bodies covered in scales and jagged armor, wielding massive weapons that glinted with dark magic. They moved with purpose, their movements unhurried, but filled with a deadly intent. One of the vanguard, a young warrior with a fierce gaze, stepped forward, her sword raised. "They're not human," she murmured, her voice filled with both awe and fear. "No," Wolf replied, his tone grim. "These are the forces of the void, creatures summoned by those who seek to destroy everything we stand for. They will test us, try to break our unity." He turned to the vanguard, his gaze steady, calm. "We fight together. Remember what we are here for. Stand with each other, protect each other, and trust in the strength you've gained." Lena stepped up beside him, her weapon at the ready, her expression one of fierce resolve. "Let's show them who the vanguard is." With a single unspoken command, the vanguard surged forward, their movements swift and precise. Wolf led the charge, his blade flashing as he met the first creature, their weapons clashing with a force that shook the ground beneath them. The creature roared, swinging a massive axe, but Wolf ducked under the blow, his blade cutting through its exposed side with deadly accuracy. The battle became a blur of steel and magic, the cries of the Vanguard blending with the roars of the void creatures. Wolf moved with practiced ease, his centuries of combat experience evident in every movement. He fought with a grace that set him apart, his strikes precise, his instincts honed. He was a blur of motion, his blade a constant arc of silver light as he cut down enemy after enemy. Beside him, Lena fought with a ferocity that matched his own, her strikes quick and lethal. She moved with the confidence of a warrior who had faced her fears, her blade a blur as she defended those around her. The Vanguard rallied around her, each person drawing strength from the presence of their leaders, their unity an unbreakable force. But even as they fought, Wolf felt the press of his immortality, a sense that, unlike those around him, he would not tire, would not falter. He was driven by a force that went beyond survival, beyond the fear of death. He fought for Selene, for Elias, for the life he had promised himself he would return to. He felt their presence in his heart, an unyielding resolve that fueled his every strike. In the midst of battle, Wolf's gaze fell on a young mage who had stumbled, his spell fizzling out as a void creature advanced on him. Without hesitation, Wolf moved, crossing the battlefield in a few strides. He intercepted the creature, his blade slicing through its torso in one swift motion. The mage looked up at him, awe and gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you," he gasped, his voice filled with relief. Wolf nodded, offering the young man a steadying hand. "Stand with your allies. Protect them as you would yourself." The mage nodded, his expression resolute as he returned to his place among the Vanguard, his courage renewed. Wolf continued forward, his blade cutting a path through the chaos, his every movement purposeful. As the battle raged on, Wolf felt the strain of his duty as both leader and warrior. He knew that each member of the Vanguard looked to him for strength, for guidance. He bore the responsibility of their safety, their unity. But he also felt something deeper, a connection to each person who fought beside him, a bond forged not just by their shared purpose, but by the trials they had endured together. The void creatures began to falter, their movements slowing as they were met with unrelenting resistance. The Vanguard fought with a unity that was more powerful than any spell or weapon, their strength drawn from each other, their resolve unbreakable. And at the center of it all was Wolf, his presence a beacon of hope, of purpose. Finally, the last creature fell, its twisted form crumbling to dust beneath the relentless onslaught of the Vanguard. Silence settled over the battlefield, the air thick with the remnants of dark energy that slowly dissipated, leaving only the quiet hum of victory. Wolf took a steadying breath, his gaze sweeping over the Vanguard. Their faces were marked with exhaustion, but in their eyes he saw something more, a sense of pride, of accomplishment. They had faced their first battle together, had held their ground, had proven themselves as protectors. Lena approached him, her face streaked with dust and sweat, her eyes bright with triumph. "We did it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yes, and this is only the beginning." The Vanguard gathered around him, their expressions a mixture of awe and respect. They had seen him in battle, had felt the strength of his presence, and they understood now why he was their leader. Wolf stood among them, his gaze steady, his heart filled with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that he had guided them through their first trial. They trusted him, not just as a warrior but as a protector, a leader who would stand with them no matter the cost. The robed figure appeared at the edge of the battlefield, their face hidden as always, but their posture one of reverence. "The first test has been passed," they announced, their voice carrying across the quiet valley. "You have proven your unity, your strength. But remember, this victory is only the beginning. The trials ahead will be greater, more daunting." Wolf stepped forward, addressing the vanguard, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "Today we fought together as one. We stood against the darkness and we won. But there will be more battles, more challenges. Each one will test us, push us to our limits. But as long as we stand together, we are stronger than anything that comes our way." The vanguard responded with a cheer, their voices rising into the night, a fierce declaration of their resolve. They had tasted victory, had felt the strength of their unity, and they were ready to face whatever lay ahead. As the night deepened, Wolf felt the weight of his immortality in a new way. He was bound to this world not just by duty, but by love, by purpose, and for the first time in centuries, he did not bear it alone. He had a family waiting for him, a family he would return to. And he had the vanguard, a force united in hope, in strength, in the promise to protect. He looked toward the stars, his heart steady, his soul unbreakable. He would face every trial, every darkness, to return to the life he had fought for, to the people he loved, and with the vanguard at his side, he knew he could. This was just the beginning. Chapter 10. Into the Abyss. The following days were tense with the lull of quiet that stretched over the vanguard's encampment at Azura's northern edge. In the calm, the vanguard healed and regrouped, but Wolf was wary. Years of combat had taught him that a victory was never final, only a brief respite before the next attack. As their leader, he knew he needed to make the vanguard's structure stronger, to prepare them for whatever darkness Azura would throw their way. So, he organized the camp, dividing the vanguard into squads, each with sub-leaders who had distinguished themselves in their previous battles. Lena, whose agility and quick thinking had turned the tide against the void creatures, took command of the scouts. They were tasked with ranging ahead, tracking threats and reporting back. He also selected a young mage named Taran, whose skill in warding magic had protected the vanguard from some of the void creatures' attacks, to lead the mage unit. Then there was Bran, a giant of a man whose brute strength and skill with an axe made him a natural fit to lead the frontline warriors. These squads would allow the vanguard to be versatile, able to adapt to ambushes or frontal assaults as needed. And at the heart of it all was Wolf, the Immortal, guiding them, holding them steady. On the fifth night, Wolf and Lena patrolled the perimeter, the air heavy with a strange chill. The quiet pressed down, almost tangible, and then it broke. The first warning came as a low hum that vibrated the earth beneath their feet. Wolf paused, his senses sharp, his hand already on the hilt of his sword. "Do you feel that?" Lena whispered, scanning the shadowed tree line. "Yes," he replied, his gaze steady, his body tensing. "We're not alone." As if summoned by his words, dark shapes began to coalesce within the trees, shadows pulling together into solid forms. These were no mere creatures. They were shades, phantasmal beings twisted by dark magic, half visible in the dim light, their bodies amorphous yet deadly, each carrying a weapon that pulsed with a sickly green glow. Their eyes burned an eerie blue, locked onto Wolf as they glided forward, a murmur of whispers rippling through the ranks. One of the shades stepped forward, a figure with a tattered, decaying cloak that barely concealed the skeletal shape beneath. It fixed its gaze on Wolf, its voice a harsh rasp. "Immortal!" It sneered, its voice crawling into his mind, oily and cold. "Do you think your years make you strong? Do you think you can save them?" Wolf met its gaze unflinching. "I've survived darkness older and deeper than you. he replied, his voice steady. "I'll send you back to the shadows you came from." The shade's mouth twisted in a cruel smile. "You have not yet tasted true darkness, but you will. It calls to you." With a shriek, the shade raised a hand and the shadows surged, hundreds of shades rushing forward with weapons raised, each one snarling, spectral bodies rippling as they closed in. Wolf and Lena drew their swords in unison, their movements fluid, precise. Their blades flashed, but as they struck, the shades dissolved into smoke, reforming immediately, their laughter echoing in the air. "Alert the others!" Wolf shouted to Lena, who nodded and sprinted back to camp, her movements quick and sure, her blade flashing as she cut through any shade that tried to intercept her. But Wolf remained, cutting through the creatures in an almost rhythmic manner. He fought with an efficiency born of centuries of experience, each strike brutal and direct. When he landed a blow, his blade cut not only flesh but seemed to draw something from the shades, weakening them. He had learned long ago that his powers as an immortal allowed him to weaken magical beings, to strip away layers of energy from his enemies with each strike, leaving them vulnerable. A shade lunged at him, its clawed hand reaching for his throat. With a quick sidestep, Wolf grabbed its wrist and twisted, driving his sword through its chest, which erupted in a burst of smoke. He did not wait to see it fall. Another was already upon him, swinging a jagged blade. Wolf ducked and drove his sword upward, impaling it under the ribs. The shade let out an unearthly scream, its body shuddering before it dissipated. But as he fought, more shades filled the space. Their voices grew louder, filling his mind with whispers meant to weaken his resolve. "You think you can win, Reaper?" one shade hissed as it lunged, its blade flashing. "You think you can protect them?" "You will watch them fall," another taunted, its voice a low hiss that curled around his mind like smoke. Wolf gritted his teeth, refusing to be drawn into their taunts. But even he could feel the strain as the shades swarmed him, each one moving with an unnatural speed, their weapons blurring as they struck. His blade moved instinctively, countering each attack, his body moving with a precision honed over centuries. He knew he was fighting not only for himself, but for his family, for the life he was determined to return to. Finally, Lena reappeared with the rest of the vanguard. Bran, the giant of a man, led the front line, his axe already slick with the black, oily blood of the shades he'd cut down. His every swing cleaved through 2 or 3 shades at a time, his roars of fury punctuating each strike. "Keep them back!" Wolf shouted as the vanguard formed a circle, weapons raised, ready to meet the onslaught. The battle erupted, shades colliding with the vanguard in a brutal clash of steel and shadow. Blood and smoke filled the air as swords and axes cut into the shades, each strike dissipating a fragment of their forms. But the shades were relentless. For every shade that fell, 2 more rose, their laughter filling the night, their attacks vicious and precise. Taran, the young mage, stood near the center, his hands raised as he chanted, creating a shimmering barrier around the vanguard that slowed the shades, buying them precious seconds. He focused on his spell, his voice steady even as sweat trickled down his face, his body tense with concentration. "I can't hold this for long," he called to Wolf, his voice strained. "We need to find the source." Wolf scanned the battlefield, searching for any sign of the source feeding these creatures. He could feel it, a dark pulse, like a heartbeat beneath his feet. It pulled at him, filling his mind with a whisper of despair, urging him to surrender, to give in. He looked to Lena, who was fighting alongside him, her movements swift, lethal. "Stay close," he said. "We're cutting through to the source." Together, they pushed forward, their blades flashing, cutting through the shades with relentless efficiency. Lena's agility allowed her to dodge and weave between the shades, her short sword slashing through their forms with deadly precision. She had a unique power of her own, a heightened perception which allowed her to sense even the subtlest movements in the shadows, a skill that saved her and Wolf multiple times as they fought their way forward. The closer they got to the center of the clearing, the stronger the dark pulse became, pounding in their ears, seeping into their bones. And then they saw it. A massive stone obelisk covered in pulsing runes that twisted and writhed, glowing with an unnatural green light. This was the source, the dark conduit feeding the shades. The shades, sensing the threat, surged toward Wolf and Lena with renewed fury. Bran and his squad fought desperately to hold them back, his axe cleaving through shades with brutal efficiency. But even he was beginning to slow, his breaths ragged as he swung his weapon, his muscles straining under the unrelenting assault. "Wolf!" Bran shouted, his voice booming over the din. "Take it down! We'll hold them!" Wolf nodded, his gaze locking onto the obelisk. He sprinted forward, his blade cutting a path through the shadows, Lena close behind, her sword flashing as she struck down any shade that moved to intercept them. Taran, seeing their intent, raised his hands, his voice rising in a powerful chant. A wave of energy surged from his outstretched palms, scattering the shades nearest the obelisk, giving Wolf and Lena the opening they needed. They reached the obelisk, the dark energy radiating from it so strong that it made the air around them thick, almost unbreathable. Wolf raised his sword, feeling the weight of centuries of battles, the strength he had drawn from each one, filling him. This was his purpose, his duty. He would not let the darkness consume them. With a mighty swing, he brought his sword down on the obelisk, the blade crashing into the stone with a deafening crack. The obelisk shuddered, the runes flickering as a web of fractures spread across its surface. The shades let out a collective wail, their forms beginning to waver, their strength diminishing as the obelisk's power waned. But it wasn't enough. The obelisk held, its runes pulsing with a desperate energy, struggling to maintain its hold on the shades. Wolf took a deep breath, summoning the strength that had carried him through centuries. He thought of Selene, of Elias, of the life he was fighting to protect. And with that thought fueling him, he swung again, his blade striking with a force that shattered the obelisk, sending shards of stone flying as the dark energy burst from within, dissipating into the air. The shades screamed, their forms disintegrating into smoke, their voices fading as the connection was severed. The battlefield fell silent, the oppressive darkness lifting, leaving only the vanguard standing amidst the remnants of the battle. Wolf lowered his sword, breathing heavily, his gaze sweeping over the exhausted but victorious vanguard. They had fought together, had faced the abyss and emerged whole, stronger for it. Lena approached him, her face streaked with dirt and sweat, her eyes filled with gratitude and admiration. "We did it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, his own heart filled with quiet satisfaction. Together. The dawn broke over the forest, casting its light on the vanguard as they regrouped, gathering around Wolf. They looked to him not just as a leader, but as a symbol of hope, of endurance. And as he looked at each of them, he knew that they were more than warriors. They were his allies, his family, bound by a purpose greater than any one of them. He thought of Selene and Elias, of the promise he had made. He would return to them. No matter the darkness that lay ahead, he would fight to see the world safe for them. The vanguard had prevailed, and this was only the beginning. Chapter 11. Shadows of Home. The vanguard spent the next few days repairing their camp, cleaning their wounds, and taking in what had happened. The darkness had been pushed back, but Wolf knew that each victory, each battle won, only bought them time. The true trial, he sensed, still awaited them. Yet in the stillness that followed, Wolf allowed himself a few precious moments to think of the life he had left behind, of the world he and the Vanguard were fighting to protect. As he moved through the camp, watching his warriors rest and rebuild, he considered the future. He could not ignore the questions that had begun to form in his mind. What awaited them once they returned to Earth? What would change when they arrived, forged by Azura's trials and marked by its strange ancient power? And more troublingly, what forces might follow them back to Earth, lured by the power they would wield? The realization that he and his warriors would change the very fabric of Earth upon their return was heavy in his mind. Humanity would not be the same when they arrived. Perhaps, he thought, the trials of Azura were not only a test of their strength, but also a way to prepare them to shoulder the impact they would have upon the world. On the third night, a sense of urgency tugged at Wolf. He left the comfort of the campfire and wandered out toward the edge of the forest, where the stars stretched across the sky like pinpoints in an endless, dark fabric. He had just begun to clear his mind when a familiar voice spoke from the shadows. Restless again? Wolf turned to find Lena standing a few steps away, her eyes fixed on the same starry expanse. She had a knack for reading him, an ability to sense the currents of his thoughts even when he shared nothing. He smiled, though it was tinged with the weight he carried. "I was thinking about what happens when we return," he admitted, his voice low. "What it will mean for Earth, for the people we left behind." Lena's gaze softened, her expression thoughtful. "I've been wondering the same thing. We're different now. Azura has changed us. We're stronger, yes, but we're also something else. We've seen things, touched powers that most people can't even imagine." Wolf nodded, his thoughts heavy. "When we return, we'll be carrying that power back with us. It will be more than just a gift to protect. It will change things, shift balances of power. People might fear us, or worse, they might want what we have." They stood in silence, the enormity of what awaited them settling over them. For centuries Wolf had lived in the shadows, hidden from the world, his immortality a secret known only to those he trusted. But once the Vanguard returned, secrecy would be impossible. Their powers, the essence of Azura that would follow them, would be unmistakable. "What about your family?" Lena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The mention of Selene and Elias stirred something deep within Wolf, a mix of longing and worry. "I don't know," he admitted. "I left them to protect them. I left thinking I could return as I was, but now I know that's impossible. I'm not the same man. The power I've gained, the responsibility, it will follow me home. I just don't know how it will affect them, how it will affect the world I wanted to protect." He thought of Selene's face, the light in her eyes when she looked at him with unshakable belief. Elias, with his small, trusting hands, and his unwavering faith in his father. They had known him as a protector, but what would they see when he returned as something more? And how would he keep them safe in a world that might soon see him and the Vanguard, not as heroes, but as threats? As he wrestled with his thoughts, a new figure approached. Taran, the young mage with his ever-watchful eyes, stepped from the darkness, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. He inclined his head respectfully before speaking. "Sorry to interrupt," Taran said, his voice steady, "but I heard you discussing the future. Earth." Wolf gestured for him to join them, sensing that Taran had insights of his own. "Azura has given us more than we asked for," Taran said, his gaze thoughtful. "The magic here, the way it binds to us, it's not just something we can cast or wield. It becomes part of us. When we return, We'll carry that power with us, and I believe it will resonate, affect the world around us. It may even awaken similar powers in others. Wolf's eyes narrowed as he considered Taryn's words. You mean we could trigger abilities in other people? Taryn nodded. Yes. Magic like this isn't just a tool, it's a force, a frequency that exists on a level few people can sense. Once we return with it, we might be a catalyst. Humanity could begin to evolve in ways we can't predict. The gravity of Taryn's words settled over them. They would return not only as warriors, but as harbingers of a new world, a world where power and magic might no longer remain hidden or rare, where the echoes of Azura's energy could reshape the very essence of humanity. Lena's gaze was intense as she spoke. If we're bringing this power back, then we have a responsibility. People won't understand it. Governments, leaders, they'll try to control it, harness it for themselves. And if that happens, we won't just be fighting the darkness. We'll be fighting our own people. The thought hung in the air, heavy with truth. Wolf could already envision the world that awaited them. A world where those in power would fear the strength of the Vanguard, where nations would see their return as a threat, where humanity's basest instincts might rise to try to claim or control what they couldn't understand. But there was something else, a possibility that lingered, just as terrifying. What if the darkness we fought here finds a way to follow us back? Wolf murmured, voicing a fear he had held silent until now. Taryn looked at him, his eyes dark and solemn. It's possible. Azura's realm is a barrier, a shield, but the same magic that strengthens us could serve as a beacon. The forces that reside here, the things we've barely glimpsed, they might sense our power and try to breach the gap between this world and Earth. Wolf clenched his jaw, his mind turning over the implications. If they returned as a bridge between realms, it could bring forth horrors humanity had never known. Earth could become a battleground, a place where the Vanguard would have to defend not just against mortal threats, but against the forces of Azura's darkest depths. As they stood in the quiet of the forest, the sky dark and endless above, Wolf felt the weight of the future settle over him, a future they would shape by their return, a future that held both hope and danger. The following morning, Wolf called a meeting of the Vanguard's sub-leaders. Lena, Taryn and Bran joined him, along with a few others who had emerged as key figures. They gathered in a circle in the center of the camp, each one bearing the marks of their recent battles, but each one also radiating strength and resolve. "We need to discuss what happens when we return to Earth," Wolf began, his tone steady, commanding. "We won't just be going back as we were. Azura has changed us, given us powers that will make us both allies and targets." Bran, his rough voice like gravel, crossed his arms. "You think people will fear us?" "They may not have a choice," Wolf replied, his gaze sweeping over the group. "When we return, it's not just us who will change. We'll be carrying a force that might awaken similar powers in others, and there are those who won't understand or accept it." Taryn stepped forward, his face calm but serious. "The power we carry, it's not just a skill or a talent. It's magic that flows through us, binds to us. When we return, it could disrupt the very nature of Earth. People might develop powers in response, but without training, without understanding, it could be dangerous." Lena looked around the circle, her expression one of determination. "Then we need to prepare. If we're going to bring this back, we need to have a plan in place. We can't let the power become something that divides us, that turns people against each other." Wolf nodded, agreeing. "Our first duty when we return will be to protect and guide. We'll need to stay unified, stay vigilant, and if this power does awaken others, we'll need to be ready to guide them, to prevent chaos." He paused, glancing at each of them in turn. "We also need to prepare for the possibility that something will follow us back, something that has sensed our power and wants to claim it. We'll need to defend Earth not just from itself, but from whatever darkness Azura's trials may have stirred. A silence fell over the group, each one considering the enormity of what lay ahead. They were not only warriors, but guardians of a future that was as uncertain as it was fraught with peril. Bran let out a deep breath, his voice rough but resolute. Then let's make sure we're ready. We've fought shades, void creatures, and whatever else Azura has thrown at us. If something comes for us on Earth, we'll be waiting. A murmur of agreement rose from the group, a quiet resolve that solidified into a plan. They would return not only as warriors but as teachers, as protectors, ready to usher humanity into a new age. They would be the vanguard in every sense, a shield, a guide, and, if needed, a sword. As the days wore on, Wolf began organizing daily training sessions. The Vanguard practiced not only their combat skills, but also the use of their powers, understanding how their unique abilities could work in tandem. Lena trained her scouts to move with precision, blending into shadows, their senses heightened to detect even the faintest hint of danger. Taryn instructed the mages, showing them how to cast protective wards that would shield others from both physical and magical attacks. Bran's warriors honed their strength, becoming a wall of iron and flesh that would hold the line against any enemy. Wolf trained them all, moving between squads, watching and correcting as they practiced. He knew that as a group they were formidable, but he wanted each of them to be prepared for what they might face on Earth. The challenges there would be unlike anything they'd encountered in Azura's realm. And beyond the mortal threats, he knew they would need to be vigilant against the dark forces that might attempt to breach the gap between realms. In the evenings, Wolf would stand alone at the edge of the camp, his thoughts drifting to Selene and Elias. He envisioned the world they might return to, a world where children like Elias could grow up with powers they didn't understand, where innocence could become caught in the crossfire of forces beyond their control. But he held on to his hope. He believed that the Vanguard could guide them, that they could use their strength to protect, to foster understanding rather than fear. He had seen too much of the darkness to let it consume the world he loved. One night as the campfire burned low, Lena joined him, her gaze thoughtful as she looked out into the shadows. "Do you think we'll ever truly be able to go back to the way things were?" Wolf considered her question, his heart heavy. But maybe that's not what we're meant to do. Azura's trials have changed us, yes, but they've given us a purpose. We may not go back as we were, but we'll go back as what we need to be. Lena's gaze softened, and she nodded, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Then let's make sure we're ready. And so they prepared, knowing that when they finally stepped back into the world they had left behind, they would bring with them the strength, the knowledge, and the power of Azura. They would bring change, for better or for worse, but they would face it together, bound by the trials that had forged them, united by the purpose that had called them to stand as humanity's first line of defense. They were the Vanguard, guardians of a world on the brink of transformation, and whatever awaited them on Earth, they would be ready. Chapter 12. The Rift. As their training intensified, the Vanguard grew into a seamless unit, each member knowing their role, their purpose. Weeks passed, blending into one long, arduous test of endurance and discipline. Each day brought them closer to the moment they would return to Earth, to the loved ones, and the world they had vowed to protect. But their training came with its own trials and mysteries. The strange energy of Azura seemed to gather around them, almost as if watching, waiting for something to happen. And soon enough, it did. One night, as they gathered around the fire for an evening meal, Taryn, the young mage, hurried into the circle, his face pale and his breath short. Wolf stood, immediately sensing the gravity of the news. "Something's wrong," Taran said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can feel a shift in the energy around us, a disturbance in the realm's balance." Wolf's gaze narrowed. "Show me." The Vanguard gathered their weapons, leaving the warmth of the fire behind as they followed Taran to the edge of the encampment. The air grew colder as they moved through the trees, and a faint hum vibrated beneath their feet. Wolf sensed it too, a low, ominous pulse that seemed to come from deep within Azura itself. The stars overhead were obscured by dark clouds, casting an eerie shadow over the land. As they reached the clearing, they saw it, a tear in the very fabric of the world. A jagged, shimmering line hovered a few feet above the ground, pulsating with energy that crackled and twisted in unnatural shapes. The tear was narrow but deep, and from within its depths Wolf could see shadows swirling, stretching, as if reaching out to escape. "What is that?" Bran rumbled, his voice low and wary. Taran took a step closer, examining the rift with a mixture of fear and fascination. "It's a rift, a tear in Azura's realm, a weak point in the barrier that separates this world from others." Wolf's heart pounded as he stepped forward, feeling the cold energy radiating from the tear. He could see faint images within the rift, distorted shapes that shifted and twisted, figures that almost looked human but were misshapen, wrong. They moved slowly, as if testing the boundaries, pushing against the fabric that held them back. "This wasn't here before," Wolf said, his voice tight with concern. "Something's causing these rifts to form. If they're opening here, they could open on Earth as well." Lena, who had been silent until now, looked at him, her eyes dark with worry. "You think this is the beginning of something bigger?" Wolf nodded, his gaze fixed on the rift. "I do. The magic we've been exposed to, the powers we've awakened. It's creating a disturbance, drawing attention from forces beyond this realm. If we don't close this rift, more could open, on Azura, and on Earth." Taran frowned, his hand hovering over the rift as he felt the energy radiating from it. "This isn't natural. Rifts like these don't just open on their own. Someone or something is manipulating the fabric of this realm, weakening it, trying to break through." The Vanguard stood in tense silence, each one feeling the weight of the danger that hung over them. If these rifts could appear on Azura, there was no guarantee they wouldn't appear on Earth. The very thought sent a chill down Wolf's spine. If such creatures broke through on Earth, there would be no barrier to contain them, no ancient magic to protect humanity. "What do we do?" Lena asked, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We close it," Wolf said, his tone resolute. "We have to stop this breach before it grows, before others appear." Taran looked at Wolf, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Closing a rift isn't simple. It requires powerful magic, and even then, the energy backlash could be devastating. Wolf met his gaze, unwavering. "Then we'll face it. If we don't stop this here, we risk bringing this nightmare back with us to Earth." The Vanguard gathered around the rift, forming a circle, each one steeling themselves for what was to come. Taran moved to the front, raising his hands, his voice steady as he began chanting in the ancient language of Azura, calling upon the magic that flowed through the realm. His voice was deep, powerful, each word filled with intent as he wove a spell to close the rift. The tension in the air was almost suffocating as Taran's chant continued, filling the clearing with a deep, resonant power. The rift trembled, its edges rippling, but something shifted in the darkness beyond, pushing back against Taran's spell with an intensity that made the ground tremble. The Vanguard stood their ground, but even Wolf could feel the energy from the rift pressing against them, fighting to hold itself open. As Taran raised his voice, his chant reaching a fever pitch, the shadows within the rift began to coalesce, forming the outline of a massive figure. Dark and indistinct at first, the shape grew clearer, more solid. The Vanguard watched in stunned silence as the figure took form, standing easily twice the height of any man, its body an armoured mass of dark metal and thick sinew. Its face was obscured, hidden beneath a helm with jagged angular edges that glowed with the same eerie blue light as the shades they had fought before. The shadows around it twisted and writhed as if alive, bending to its will. Then, as they watched, the figure reached out, an enormous hand extending from the rift, fingers stretching, clawed and armoured, grasping the edges of the tear. The fingers flexed, pulling at the edges, and the rift began to widen under its grip, the jagged line trembling, straining against Taran's spell. The Vanguard felt the air shift, the cold energy pouring from the rift pressing down on them with an intensity that drained their strength. Some of the warriors faltered, their knees buckling under. The weight of the creature's presence. Even Taran's voice wavered as he fought to hold the spell, sweat pouring down his face, his entire body trembling from the force of his magic. The figure leaned forward, bringing its face close to the rift's edge, and through the distortion of the portal, Wolf could see its eyes, two burning coals of icy blue, fixed on him with a gaze filled with malice and ancient, boundless hate. The hand gripped the rift tighter, pulling it open, stretching it wider as the creature's massive head and shoulders began to push through. The rift shuddered, resisting Taran's spell, and the voices of the Vanguard began to falter, their wills pushed to the edge as the creature's cold aura filled the clearing. And then it spoke, its voice low and mocking, filled with an arrogance that seemed to seep into the very air around them. "You cannot close us out," it intoned, its voice resonating with a power that sent a shiver through the Vanguard. "You are mortal, weak, bound by limits we do not have." Wolf felt the chill of its words settle over him, clawing at his resolve. The figure's hand pressed harder, its massive fingers digging into the edges of the rift, forcing it wider with each second. The other members of the Vanguard faltered, their strength waning under the sheer presence of this being. "You think you can protect them?" The voice echoed again, darker this time, filled with cold malice. "You think your strength, your power is enough? We will find you, immortal. We will follow you, and we will claim what you hold dear." The words struck at Wolf like a blade, cutting through his defences, filling him with images of Selene and Elias, vulnerable, helpless. The vision of his son's small hands, his wife's trusting gaze, flashed through his mind, tainted by the image of this creature, this dark, consuming force that could tear through everything he loved. But Wolf was no stranger to the abyss. He had stared into it for centuries, survived it, fought against its relentless pull. And in that moment, something deep within him, something ancient and primal, surged to the surface, a power he had never touched, something older than his own immortality, something that had lain dormant, waiting. With a fierce, unyielding resolve, he stepped forward, his gaze locking onto the creature's eyes, refusing to give an inch. The figure's fingers stilled, its grip loosening as it seemed to sense the power rising within him. Wolf felt it too, felt it coil within him like a living force, filling every corner of his being with a heat that pushed back the cold, a light that countered the darkness. "You think I will let you take them," he said, his voice low but filled with a power that reverberated through the clearing, a primal force that sent a shockwave through the rift. His eyes flared, their depths filled with a fierce, otherworldly light that was neither mortal nor bound by time. The figure paused, its blue eyes narrowing as it took in the surge of energy around him, a flicker of hesitation crossing its gaze. For the first time, the creature seemed uncertain, a faint trace of fear glinting in its cold, calculating eyes. "Enough!" Wolf roared, and as he did, a burst of raw energy erupted from him, a wave of power that sent the creature reeling, its massive hand tearing away from the rift as if burned. The edges of the tear began to tremble, pulling inward as if responding to his command, to the force of his will. The creature staggered, its imposing figure shuddering as it looked back at him, stunned, almost afraid. Its hand reached forward again, but this time with caution, its massive fingers flexing as if testing the boundary between worlds. But Wolf's power was relentless, his gaze unwavering as he drew upon the primal force within him, pushing back against the creature's influence, his will absolute. He stepped forward, the ground beneath him cracking from the force of his presence, each step reverberating through the air. The figure let out a low growl, its grip faltering as the rift began to close, the edges pulling tighter, severing the connection that bound it to this realm. The creature's gaze locked onto Wolf, its voice laced with a simmering anger, but also a hint of something else, an acknowledgement, a realization that it was facing something it had not expected. "This is not over," it hissed, its voice filled with a promise of vengeance. "We will find you, Immortal, and when we do, your world will fall." With a final, ear-splitting roar, the figure withdrew, its form dissolving into shadows as the rift sealed itself, closing with a burst of blinding light. The Vanguard shielded their eyes, the force of the closing rift sending a shockwave through the clearing, scattering leaves and dust into the air. When the light faded, the rift was gone, and the clearing was silent once more. Wolf stood in the center, his breath coming in heavy bursts, the primal power within him settling, receding back into the depths of his being. He could feel it still, a quiet, waiting presence, but it was subdued, as if content to rest for now. The Vanguard gathered around him, their expressions a mixture of awe and uncertainty. They had felt the power he had unleashed, had seen the figure's hesitation, the flicker of fear that had crossed its face. They looked at him not just as their leader, but as something more, something they could barely understand. Lena stepped forward, her voice quiet, but filled with admiration. "What was that, Wolf?" He looked at her, his gaze steady, though he himself didn't fully understand the force he had just wielded. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice low. "Something old, something I'd almost forgotten was there." Taran approached, his eyes wide, his voice filled with a quiet awe. "That, whatever that was, it was stronger than anything I've ever seen. It was like the very essence of Azura itself." Wolf nodded, though he wasn't certain. He only knew that the power had come from somewhere deep within him, something that had been with him long before he had joined the Vanguard, long before he had become the Reaper. It was a force that transcended time, something primal, something meant to protect. He looked around at the Vanguard, seeing the strength in their faces, the unspoken bond that held them together. They were his family, his allies, the ones who would stand with him against the darkness that threatened not only Azura, but the world beyond. And he would protect them, just as he would protect the world they had left behind, the world he was determined to return to. The creature's words echoed in his mind, a warning he knew he could not ignore. They would come for him, for all of them. The darkness would follow, seeking to claim what he held dear. But as he looked out over his warriors, as he felt the primal force settle within him, he knew that he would be ready. They all would. The Vanguard was more than a group of warriors, They were a force, a promise, the guardians of a world that did not yet know what lay beyond the rifts. And they would fight, together, against any threat, any darkness, to keep that promise. The Vanguard, silent but resolved, stood together beneath the darkening sky, knowing they would soon return to Earth. Each of them carried the power and the burden of Azura within, bound together by promises both spoken and unspoken. Wolf felt the faint pulse of his newfound strength, a force as old as time, as he looked to his warriors, his family. Their journey was only beginning, but they would face the unknown together. Whatever awaited them on the other side of the rifts, they were ready. Thank you for listening to Riftborn, A World Reforged. I truly appreciate your support and hope you're enjoying this journey as much as I've loved bringing it to life. If you're excited to hear what's next, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a chapter. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think of Ethan's story so far.